I never thought I'd see the day when my credit card company decided what games I'm allowed to play. But that's where we are now. Visa and Mastercard have stepped in as the new gatekeepers of gaming, and their decisions have already led to Steam removing hundreds of games from its storefront. If you care about gaming as an art form, this should concern you. Once they start banning controversial games, where does it stop? Today it's adult content, tomorrow it could be anything. To understand how we reached this point, let's look at the power these payment processors actually hold. Visa and Mastercard's dominance is hard to overstate. They handle nearly 70% of all credit card transactions worldwide, covering everything from digital storefronts like Steam and itch.io to small indie shops. While they claim to simply process payments, not police content, their recent actions tell a different story. In practice, they've shifted from moving money to deciding what kinds of games can be sold, much like 2020 mass video removals under Visa and Mastercard pressure. Digital games now face the same financial gatekeeping. The way it works is straightforward but effective. If a platform sells something Visa or Mastercard disapproves of, those companies can cut off access to their services. Without them, most online stores simply can't function. This isn't new. Other industries, especially adult entertainment, have been forced to remove legal content or lose payment processing entirely. Now, the same approach is being used against games. Transparency is a big problem here. Visa says it doesn't moderate content directly, but instead relies on reports from banks, public complaints, and activist groups to flag merchants as risky. That means outside groups can pressure them into action, even when the content is legal. Mastercard has similar vague policies, and neither company provides clear guidelines about what crosses the line. For example, Steam's Rule 15 now removes any game that may violate processor standards, a phrase that Valve admits gives Visa the final word on what stays or goes. This puts game developers in a tough spot. If Valve or itch.io gets flagged, they have to choose between losing payment options or removing games from their store. Independent studios don't have the resources to push back. Since these decisions aren't made through public policy or legal action, there's no official appeals process. Games can disappear overnight because of a single complaint, and developers are often left in the dark about what happened. The scale of this is what makes it so concerning. Visa and Mastercard are private companies, but their decisions end up shaping what kind of creative work can exist online. If they decide a game shouldn't be available, storefronts have to comply or risk being cut off from majority of global payments. And it's not just about adult content. Games with political themes, horror elements, or strong language could easily be next. The rules are unclear, and enforcement can be arbitrary. Behind these decisions, there's often a third party pushing for change. Sometimes it's banks, sometimes it's activist groups. To really understand why certain groups are suddenly being targeted, it helps to look at who's raising the complaints and what their goals are. Founded in 2009, Collective Shout campaigns against media they deem exploitative, from music to now games. The group describes itself as a grassroots movement fighting the objectification of women and sexualization of girls in media, advertising, and pop culture. Their focus has shifted over time, but their approach is consistent. If they find content they believe crosses a line, they organize campaigns to get it removed or censored. Their most recent effort zeroed in on adult-themed games available through digital storefronts like Steam and itch.io. In July 2025, Collective Shout launched a campaign specifically targeting titles such as No Mercy due to its controversial content. Their argument was that these games violated Australian classification laws, even if many weren't officially sold in Australia. Rather than approaching the game developers or the storefronts themselves, Collective Shout went straight to the financial infrastructure. Their open letter named executives at Visa and Mastercard, then mobilized over 1,000 supporters to bombard these companies with emails and calls. The message was direct: stop processing payments for platforms that host these games or face public backlash. This tactic of using financial pressure instead of legal channels is deliberate. Collective Shout understands that platforms like Steam and itch.io rely on payment processors to function. By convincing Visa and Mastercard that hosting certain games could damage their reputation, the group bypassed traditional moderation systems and regulatory bodies. Once payment processors start to feel the heat, platforms have little choice but to comply or risk losing the ability to operate. The standards Collective Shout uses to define problematic content aren't always clear. and there's no public list or transparent process. This means a game might disappear while another with similar themes remains, all depending on which titles catch the group's attention and how much pressure they can generate. The consequences of this approach are immediate and far-reaching. After Collective Shout's campaign, games began vanishing from storefronts with little to no explanation. Developers weren't told why their work was removed or given a chance to appeal. The decision-making process happened behind closed doors, driven by financial institutions responding to activist demands. For indie developers, this adds a layer of uncertainty. One day their game is live, the next it's gone, with no clear reason given. Collective Shout's influence isn't absolute, but their success in getting payment processors to act shows how a focused campaign can reshape what's available online. The lack of transparency and due process makes it hard for creators to know where the boundaries are or how to protect their work. With payment processors now acting as unofficial content moderators, the mechanisms behind these removals deserve a closer look. When it comes to how this censorship actually happens, the process is indirect but highly effective. Payment processors like Visa and Mastercard don't remove games themselves. Instead, they threaten platforms with losing access to payment services if they don't comply with certain standards. For a storefront like Steam, losing Visa and Mastercard would mean most customers couldn't buy anything, so the pressure is enormous. This is what led Steam to introduce Rule 15 on July 16, 2025. Rule 15 reads, "Content that may violate the rules and standards set forth by Steam's payment processors." The wording is intentionally broad, and it goes further than Steam's prior rules, which already banned illegal or mislabeled adult content. Now, any game that might run afoul of a payment processor's standards, no matter how vague those standards are, can be pulled from the store. As a result, titles with words like incest or non-consensual themes vanished overnight, even if they were legal and previously allowed. Some games that didn't even feature explicit sexual content were affected, just because their themes could be seen as risky. Developers and players had no way to predict what would trigger a removal. Valve admitted in a statement that they implemented Rule 15 because payment processors gave them an ultimatum: either comply or lose the ability to process payments. For Steam, that wasn't a real choice. Meanwhile, itch.io faced similar pressure and responded by de-indexing over 70,000 adult or not suitable for work games from their browse and search pages. Their founder, Leif Corcoran, confirmed this step was taken directly to protect the platform's payment infrastructure. While the games technically still exist, they're almost impossible to find unless you have a direct link. For developers, the fallout was immediate. Many saw their games disappear without warning, and some lost access to payouts, cutting off their income overnight. The International Game Developers Association released a statement calling for transparency and clearer guidelines, echoing the frustration of indie creators who felt blindsided. Developers like Robert Gang criticized the idea that payment companies should decide what counts as acceptable content, and others pointed out that these sudden changes threaten entire livelihoods. The broader effect is a chilling one. With no vague guidelines and no appeals process, developers now operate in a climate of uncertainty. Even games without controversial elements might get swept up in the next wave of removals. The mechanism isn't about targeting what's illegal, it's about silencing anything that a small group of activists or payment processors find objectionable. Storefronts have stopped moderating content on their own terms and now simply react to financial pressure. Players are feeling the effects too. Games can disappear from libraries overnight with no advance notice or explanation. There's no public debate or legal review, just a quiet disappearance. For many in the community, this overreach from payment processors is a step too far, and is starting to spark a backlash. The reaction from the gaming community has been organized and sustained. Instead of just venting frustrations online, gamers quickly mobilized to challenge Visa and Mastercard's role in removing games. One of the most visible efforts is a Change.org petition, which has gathered over 175,000 signatures. The petition calls for payment processors to stop restricting access to legal content, demands transparency in how content decisions are made, and urges an end to outside activist group influence on these policies. To keep the momentum going, gamers are sharing resources on platforms like Reddit and Blue Sky. These include executive email addresses, customer service numbers, and scripts for emails and calls. The idea is to make it easy as possible for people to reach out and express their disapproval. This mirrors the tactics used by groups like Collective Shout, but now the pressure is coming from those who want to protect creative freedom rather than restrict it. Gamers are encouraged to be respectful but persistent, making it clear that there are issues with company policies, not with frontline customer service staff. Reports have surfaced that Visa representatives are fielding multiple calls about the censorship, showing that the campaign is reaching the right people. The goal is to create enough disruption that Visa and Mastercard have to acknowledge the backlash and reconsider their approach. Some developers have joined these efforts, sharing personal stories about how payment processor policies have affected their livelihoods. The movement isn't limited to those who make or play adult games. Many participants argue that letting payment processors decide what's allowed sets a dangerous precedent for all types of content. If a company can remove one genre because it's controversial, there's nothing stopping them from expanding those restrictions to political games, horror titles, or anything that might attract complaints. This worry about a slippery slope has become a unifying concern, drawing in people who might not otherwise have paid attention to the issue. What stands out is how persistent the pushback has been. Unlike other controversies that fade quickly, this campaign keeps growing as more people become aware of the stakes. The sense is that the fight isn't just about a few banned titles, it's about who gets to set the boundaries for creative work in gaming. The uncertainty created by these new rules has made many in the community question what kind of games will be possible in the future. Looking ahead, the risks tied to payment processor censorship go well beyond the current wave of adult game bans. The vague rules used by Visa and Mastercard mean that almost any game could become a target, depending on how these companies or outside groups interpret the content. This isn't just a theory, it's already happening. Two games, Consumi and Last Call, were delisted even though they don't fit the adult content label. Consumi is about body image and eating disorders, and Last Call deals with domestic abuse. Their removal shows that the guidelines are so broad, even games addressing serious topics can get swept up. This approach creates a climate where developers start to second-guess what they can safely include in their games. Some have already reported shelving projects because they're unsure if a payment processor will flag their work as too risky. The International Game Developers Association has called out this trend, warning that vague enforcement especially hurts marginalized creators, since their stories are more likely to be labeled controversial or misunderstood. When developers self-censor out of fear, players lose out on diverse stories and challenging themes. The consequences aren't just limited to a few genres or themes, as Japan's Fair Trade Commission now applies antitrust sanctions to Visa for pressuring sites to remove legal adult content. The global precedent grows for all content, not just adult games. In Japan, this pressure led to business closures and government investigation. It's a clear example of how payment processors can reshape entire industries simply by controlling who gets paid. Groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation warn that when financial companies restrict access, it creates real problems for free speech online. If payment processors can quietly remove games based on unclear standards, there's nothing stopping them from extending these actions to any content they or outside pressure groups find objectionable. This isn't just a matter of losing a few games. It's about who gets to decide what stories are told and what experiences players can have. Until that changes, the risk of further censorship remains high, and the gaming industry's creative boundaries will be shaped by financial decisions rather than community standards or artistic vision. With these risks in mind, it's important to recognize what's really at stake when payment processors step in and decide what content is allowed in gaming. This is a turning point for gamers and developers. Payment processors like Visa and Mastercard now have the power to decide what content stays on gaming platforms, and that influence is shaping the future of what we can play. Successful pushback in the past shows we can reclaim control. Our purchases, our choices. And speaking of purchases, check out my review on Pirate Software's game Heartbound and see if it is worth your time and money.